welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. I'm Diane, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And today's episode is brought to you by Sheila Darling Coaching. Sheila Darling is a social worker, certified hypnotherapist, and mindfulness meditation teacher who could be your start to a more peaceful life. And today's episode is also brought to you by Original Sprout. Original Sprout carries safe, effective, and pediatrician-tested shampoos, conditioners, styling, and body care products produced and packaged in California, USA. And we'll hear more from our sponsors later, but these sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you could please head to badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com and check out our sponsor page if you need anything. Give them your business if you can. While you're there, scroll down and enter your email address, and you'll get episodes sent straight into your inbox. And now Diane has our review of the week.
Yes, and our review of the week came from Gmail, and it is from Shelby Lee. She said, I just had my first baby, Riley Elizabeth, 9 weeks ago. My mom breastfed me and my siblings, and I knew I wanted to do the same. But I live 9 hours away, and everything has changed in the last 25 years. Also, my mother was 120 pounds soaking wet, and I'm 260. I had the hardest time at the hospital with finding a lactation consultant that encouraged me to feed my child even with my large boobs. I had triple Ds before baby, and now once I'm engorged, they are huge. Everyone encouraged me to just switch to bottle feeding because I just didn't have the right body for breastfeeding. Everyone went to the cradle hold, and I couldn't see my baby to make sure that A, she was latched right, and B, she wasn't suffocating. Can we talk about techniques for plus-size women who want to breastfeed? I'm so thankful for your podcast and have been binge listening while feeding and pumping on my way to work. I've had so many people tell me it's too hard and encourage me to formula feed. Even saying, I know you don't make a lot, let the government feed your baby. First off, have you tried government cheese? I doubt the formula is much better. My biggest thing is to not let other people's comfort, opinion, and need for convenience destroy what I am setting out to give my child. Listening to your open canter and in-your-face responses has helped me find some confidence and guts to do what she needs. I was literally just at the ER with her for medical issues and walked through the hospital uncovered, feeding my child because she was so ill and needed to eat, but we were being rushed to the x-ray room. A nurse asked me if I needed a room to wait in. I told her I didn't need a room due to her comfort level. My child was comfortable getting this done as fast as possible and eating along the way. I'm not afraid of my breast. I'm not afraid to be a badass breastfeeder. Done with my rant. Thank you for being outspoken and having a path for us newbies. That is amazing, and I loved it.
I like how, and so again, a situation where you can't win. So people are like, you have small boobs, you can't breastfeed because you don't have enough milk. Oh, no, wait, your boobs are too big to breastfeed.
You don't have enough milk. Yeah. You have to have the perfect boobs.
Yeah.
Where have you been, Abby?
Well,
didn't you know that?
Breastfeeding. It's not boobs. Sports Illustrated.
I know. It's ridiculous.
Which is also so dumb, but anyway.
I know. Oh, my God. I'm so glad that she is feeling the confidence.
Yeah.
Because good for her. And I wish I'd read this during the episode for Big Boobs. I hope you listened to it, Shelby Lee. It was like, a week ago or so.
Diane meant to read it. She just forgot.
I did. I need a secretary. I don't remember anything. I'm really bad about these things. But yes, I meant to read it for that one. And I think it would have been perfect for that episode. So thank you so much for sending this in, for letting us know your journey. Send us your reviews, your stories, anything like that, podcast ideas. We'd love to hear it. You can reach out to us at badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com, or you can put it on iTunes. And let's go with today.
Yes, today we have Melissa Morns. She is here in person. You all probably remember the article that we talked about from Nursing Aversion at the beginning of the year, but today she's here and she's talking all about her research. And let's get to it. Welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast, Melissa Morns. It is such a pleasure for you to be here, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day down under.
Hi.
I don't know if anybody yes, everybody. I don't know if anybody realizes. They won't realize, but you're in Australia.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Which is like
and I'm in Australia, Brisbane, Australia.
That's really cool to us up here because that just seems very like exotic. We are here talking about nursing aversion, and you guys might remember that we did an episode a few months ago where we talked about Melissa's research paper that her and her colleagues published about nursing aversion, and it was the episode is linked in the show notes of this episode, so you can head right there if you want to listen to that. It was a really fantastic paper that we talked about in detail, really about what nursing aversion is and what people were reporting were their experiences. And I just remember reading it, and it was just, I could just feel it in my body. I could just feel the whole paper and all the things that people were saying. It was just really very moving.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your work so much. And maybe do you want to start with maybe a little brief introduction about you, who you are? And then I think we're going to get into your story and how you really came to be really like a leading voice in the world of nursing aversion.
Yeah, so right now I have a master's in public health, and right now I'm doing a PhD on women or people who experience feelings of aversion while breastfeeding at the University of Technology, Sydney. And I have 3 supervisors. One of my supervisors, Dr. Amy Steele, has a PhD in public health. Another one, Dr. Erica McIntyre, has a PhD in psychology. And I have another supervisor from a different university, Western Sydney University, Dr. Elaine Burns, who has a PhD in midwifery. So we have that broad skill set in the team.
That's excellent. That's very helpful in getting kind of a well-rounded perspective on this.
Yeah. I feel really grateful. They're just the best, most awesome supervisors. So I really lucked out with those guys.
And so how did you get to? And so are you a doctoral candidate? Is that
yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm a doctoral candidate in public health. That's my area, public health.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you are focusing on are you focusing on nursing aversion in your research?
Yeah. So that's actually a big question because we know that there are negative experiences that some people have when they're breastfeeding. And we know about dysphoric milk ejection reflex, and people like Kathy Kendall Tackett have done heaps of work on people with a history of assault and the effect that can have when you're trying to breastfeed. But then there's this other type of feelings of aversion that's just not in the literature at all. And a lot of that is around the tandem breastfeeding and breastfeeding while you're pregnant, breastfeeding when your period returns. And because there's really not very much out there at all, we're having to sort of cast the net. Well, we did have to cast the net pretty wide for that first paper, the one that you already did a podcast on, and we sort of grouped them all in there. But as we go forward with the research, I am planning on drilling down into those different types of aversion because they do really present differently, and because they present differently and they're coming from different causes, the way that we deal with those and the way that we give support to people who are experiencing that, it needs to be tailored specifically for those different kinds of aversion. So that is something that we're trying to do right now. We're trying to drill down and just piece it apart. Like, what are these different types? And then what does that mean? And the people that experience that, like, what are they doing to help, and how are they getting through that, and can we recreate those things and teach other people to do those things? So yeah, it's pretty big. It's a pretty massive subject to delve into, and we are just at the beginning. We're at the beginning of it right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me to think, and I feel like I'm about to go on a tangent, and maybe I shouldn't. But it's fascinating for me to think about my own tandem nursing experience when I had Exley in 2014 and kind of posting about it on Facebook. And that's when you got in touch with me, like through Facebook Messenger, and was like, hey, I have this group and we're doing a lot of work on this. And so maybe we'll use this as a segue. You have a story too, right? I mean, this isn't your personal experiences has brought you here to this research. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually have 4 kids. I have a bigger kid and then the 3 little ones. And so when I and I have been very lucky to be able to have them all naturally, and I'm all about the co-sleeping and attachment parenting and all of that. So and when I breastfed my first one, who's now an adult, it was really hard at first. It was really difficult. My first breastfeeding experience, I had like really bad nipple. I don't know if this is too much information, but really bad nipple damage.
No, not for this podcast. There's no such thing as too much information.
Okay, well, how about, all right, well, my partner now thought that one of my nipples was deformed because part of one of them came off when I was breastfeeding my first one, and it never grew back.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I know, it was bad. It was like really full on. So yeah, for those of you out there that have permanent nipple damage, we see you.
And this was and what's the story behind that?
Oh, just like really bad latch issues, I think, maybe at the beginning. I don't know. But the home visit midwife, I had like bleeding and cracking for about 6 weeks, which they said was too long. And they were, but I was so stubborn. I was determined. But anyway, I breastfed him till he was about 18 months old and fell pregnant again. And then the doctors told me then that I had to wean him because I was pregnant. And, I was young and I just thought, I don't know, I guess this is what I have to do. So I weaned him, but then I miscarried. I lost that baby when about 4 months in. And by that stage, I'd already weaned my toddler at the time. So anyway, fast forward to me having the little three. And so when I had them close together, and I was told when I was pregnant with the first one, my 10-year-old, to wean when I fell pregnant with my now 8-year-old, I was older and knew a bit better by then and was like, no, I don't have to do that. I know I don't have to wean. And so I planned to tandem breastfeed. And so I breastfed all the way through my pregnancy. And no one mentioned anything about aversion. No one, there was no, I didn't really see any talk of that. And then for me, the aversion kicked in after I started tandem breastfeeding and was particularly bad if I had them both on at the same time. And so we also have, we have the aversion support group, but we also have some tandem breastfeeding support groups, and we've got regional tandem breastfeeding support groups as well. And I went into the main tandem group and just said, is anybody else experiencing this? And there were just a handful of other people who were having the same experience. And so we started the aversion group, and there was like 4 or 5 of us. It was really small. And yeah, we just kind of muddled our way through, but it was really difficult for me. I still talk about experiencing aversion as just one of the most difficult things I've ever experienced in my life. And I think, there's feeling touched out, and, people talk about pain. And I had that with my first one. I had a lot of breastfeeding pain with my first one, and there's being touched out, and there's, those other experiences. But this is not just being irritated. This is the feeling of that type of aversion is, well, we've found from the interviews that we're doing that women often use the word throw. Throw the baby. It's a really primal, very strong, full body, heebie-jeebies feeling that is, with touched out, it's kind of you're touched out and that's kind of directed at the child. But with this kind of tandem and pregnant aversion, it's within you, it's in your own body. And for me, that was the hardest part of it, is that I felt like just not having control of the inside of my own body was the part that bothered me the most about it. That loss of internal control. And yeah, we're finding that as well with the research, that these stories sort of come up again and again. But that group has grown a lot bigger now, and we put a lot of files in the group to help people. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, that is such an interesting perspective that I haven't exactly heard before. I haven't heard somebody put it that way before, that it's, it's like this out of control thing. It's inside of you, and it's working against you because, there also what's inside of you is like breast milk, and your desire to to nurture your child, and then you have this exact opposite out of control desire in your body.
Yeah.
And it's like these two completely conflicting things happening within you.
Yeah, absolutely. And for a lot of the
It's so completely demoralizing.
Yeah. And for a lot of the tandem mums that experience aversion, these are people that have breastfed for a while. Like they're breastfeeding a toddler, they've breastfed through all kinds of breastfeeding difficulties and overcome those difficulties. Many of them are attachment parents, they're sleeping with their baby tucked under their arm and have been for years. And for parents with that kind of perspective to then get aversion. Like for me, when I experienced aversion and there was just that tiny little group, and the only thing that I had ever found on it or that I could find was Hillary had a little bit in her book, Hillary Flower, Adventures in Tandem Breastfeeding. She's expanded that now with their second edition. She's got some more stuff in there about aversion, and it's awesome. It's an awesome book. But yeah, that was the only thing that I had found, and that's what gave me the impetus to start that little first group. Was that little bit in Hillary's original book, and at the time it was just chaotic for me. Like I wasn't able to continue nursing my toddler. It was just like chaos. She's a really sensitive little person as well, and she would be crying and I was crying. My partner was back at work and I was home alone. And it was really, really hard. It was a really difficult season. And the way that we ended up like going through that was I started pumping for her, and I had never pumped before. I started pumping breast milk just for her. So my newborn wasn't getting any pumped milk, just my toddler. And we were giving her that at night time so that her dad could sort of be with her in the evening. And we used to just read stories to her until she passed out, basically, to just get through that nighttime thing. And she was just staying up a bit later, but we were like, oh well, this is just what's going to have to happen for now. And during the day I would pop her and my little guy in a pram, in like a double pram, and because she used to love going for walks, and so I would pop them in a pram and I'd give her these little ices.
That stroller for all the Americans.
Oh, yeah. And I would give her an icy, which she loved, and off we'd go. And I would just walk until she fell asleep for that day nap, past the shop that had Ben & Jerry's, because that was one of my coping mechanisms. I ate so much Ben & Jerry's. And yeah, that's just how we got through it. But like your stuff on boundaries, Abby, is so awesome. Like I shared your that boundaries podcast in the aversion group last week, and I kind of wish I'd really known that then. Like I wish I'd had that advice when I was going through it, because I think
me too.
Yeah. That's why we do it. Hey, that's why we do this stuff, so that other people can have the things that we really needed at the time. But also, like health professionals. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't find the group, or they don't, they Google it, they don't really find, or they don't even Google it. They just go to their GP. They go to their GP and they say, I'm having this experience. And that's really with the research, that's where I'm trying to hit with the research. I'm trying to get lactation consultants, midwives, GPs, just health professionals, so that people that go, that's their first port of call, to go and talk to their lactation consultant or midwife. They will have heard of it, because like I work with a lot of midwives now, and still now it's amazing how few people have heard of this. And whenever I speak about this to a group of lactation consultants and midwives, they're fascinated. Like they want to know, they want to help. But it's just, until it's in the literature, and I mean, I'll continue to try to talk at health professional seminars and stuff, and try to keep getting the word out. And there is actually another researcher, you might not have heard of her yet, Abby. Her name's Charlie Middleton, and she's in Scotland. And she's just starting up doing research, a PhD on this as well. So thank goodness there are more people getting on board. And I think her focus is a little bit more on DEMA. I think that's where she sort of came to it.
Okay.
But that's awesome. It's so great that it's starting.
I know we need so many people on this. And I think here in the United States, we have the practitioners here, they don't hear about it and they're just like, well, just wean.
Yeah.
If it's that bad and you're not enjoying it, then just wean. That's always the answer.
Yeah.
Is just wean. Just use formula. It's no big deal. And it's not a big deal in that if that's what you need to do and that's what you want to do, then definitely do that. But it is a big deal in the sense that that's not what people want. That's not what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's not what you wanted. People want, that's the problem. Therein lies the problem, right? Is that you want to continue nursing.
Yeah.
You want to continue with this relationship and it's like there's this invisible force working against you that you don't know its name, you don't know what it wants, you don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
But then people just, and then you're like, I need help with this, I need help. And people are like, well, just wean. I don't know. That's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's just because it's a toddler and your toddler is supposed to just not be nursing anymore. So that's just a sign. It's a sign. This is what they say. It's a sign that it's time for you to stop nursing.
Yeah. Yeah. And people hear it from their partners and they hear it from their family and friends. It's not just doctors. Like people hear that. It's ubiquitous. Right. They go into breastfeeding support groups and hear that. And you can't just say that to a mum who sleeps with her baby tucked in her armpit and has to look into those little eyes when they want to breastfeed. Like you can't just say, just stop. It just shows a lack of understanding of what's actually going on there for that.
Well, it does. And it's this idea that breastfeeding is disposable, right? Because we wouldn't say that about anything else. Anything else that is problematic and that we're struggling with, it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our intervention. We're like, we love it's in America. We love interventions. Like, let's get all the interventions going here. Yeah. But with breastfeeding and, this kind of thing, it's just like, it's disposable, whatever, just wean. It's no big deal. And it's so frustrating because, there's no motivation to learn about it. It's just like, well, it's just all these women who are complaining about how hard it is. And so if it's so hard, then why don't they just stop?
And something that's come through in the interviews is that the people that were able to continue or at least end their breastfeeding journey in a way that they felt okay with, for themselves and really importantly for their little one. Like if they feel okay with how it ended, or they were able to continue and have it end when they felt like they were ready or their little one was ready, it's psychologically so much better for the mother, for the parent, if they're able to just find an ending to that in a way that they felt like they were in some way in control of. Even if they still look back on Aversion and say it's one of the worst things that they've ever experienced, even if they say that, just if they can come away with a narrative, with a story about how it ended, how the weaning happened or how it ended, it just has this huge impact. And it's not just, this is something I'm writing into an article right now that I'm about to publish, but there is so much focus on with breastfeeding from the health community about getting breastfeeding right. It's about latch, it's about supply, it's about all of these things. And there isn't a lot of focus on breastfeeding actually being a relationship. It's a relationship between the mother and the infant, or the parent and the infant. And that's a complex thing. It's complicated. And it's a two-way thing as well. The parent gets a lot from breastfeeding as well. And we don't talk about that. Like it's not something that's just commonly in the narrative about breastfeeding. It's all about what's the baby getting from it. And I actually, just out of curiosity, I went into one of the groups the other day and I said, not one of our groups, just a different group, and just said, hey, what do you think the parent gets out of breastfeeding when they breastfeed? And a lot of people were like, oh, lower cancer rates and a lot of those physical things. And I was like, what about the emotional part? Like, and then some started saying nurturing and love. And it's just, it's really intriguing to me philosophically that we haven't really looked into this properly, that it's so complex, breastfeeding. It's not just about supply and latch. It's not just about nutrients for the baby. There's so much more going on there, and it's a relationship. But yeah.
Yeah, and that's what we always say. It's so much more than food,
Yeah.
right? Breastfeeding is so much more than food. Because it's not just, you're right, it's like we focus on, well, if it doesn't work out, it's no big deal. You just switch the breast milk for formula.
Mm.
Okay, but that's not that's not everything it's about. There is, everything you were just saying. There's so much more going on
Yeah. And they have actually,
that we don't take into consideration.
yeah, sorry. And they have actually done research around when people who want to breastfeed have to stop before they're ready, that causes higher levels of anxiety and depression and, poorer mental health outcomes. So we know that for those that want to breastfeed and can't, it's not, yeah, we know that. And we also know that those that are trying to breastfeed and having problems, not just aversion, but problems in general, don't feel like they're getting enough support. So,
Right.
yeah.
And we'll be right back with Melissa Morns and talking about nursing aversion after a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is sponsored by Sheila Darling Coaching. The transition to parenthood can be intense. Feelings of anxiety, depression are actually quite common. Your feelings should not be ignored. You deserve space where you can process this transition and all of the emotional and psychological changes that come with it. You may hear people telling you to just enjoy it, or it all goes by so fast. These statements are dismissive of the changes we go through when we have a new baby. Transitioning to a new family member isn't always the peaceful journey we see on TV. Sheila Darling Coaching can be that professional support person that Diane and I are always saying there is no shame in getting. Sheila Darling is a social worker, certified hypnotherapist, and mindfulness meditation teacher, and could be your start to a more peaceful life. Head to SheilaDarling.com to schedule your consultation today and mention the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast when you're scheduling that consultation and receive 10% off a coaching package. Today's episode is also brought to you by Original Sprout. Original Sprout carries safe, effective, and pediatrician-tested shampoos, conditioners, styling, and body care products produced and packaged in California, USA. Their hair and body baby wash is made with gentle moisturizing ingredients such as organic calendula and refreshing rosemary extract. Rosemary helps stimulate scalp circulation and calm cradle cap and eczema. The hair and body baby wash is ideal for babies, children, and adults alike. All of Original Sprouts products are paraben and phthalate free, vegan and cruelty free. Their prepared proprietary formulas contain nourishing extracts from fruits, vegetables, and flowers that the whole family can enjoy. They are not just for babies anymore. Check out the entire line at originalsprout.com and use code BADASS for 25% off of your order. All these sponsors and their codes can be found in our show notes under this episode on badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. Our show notes also include further information about things we talk about in this episode. And at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com, you'll also find our breastfeeding resources, all of our other episodes, and information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Diane. And this week's shout out goes to Voices for Birth Justice. We are moms and advocates united for birth justice in the Black and Brown communities. You can find them on Instagram at Voices for Birth Justice, and you can find them also at their website at voicesforbirthjustice.org, where you can find all kinds of information about, babies in the Black and Brown communities that are being born too small and too soon. And I hope we all know now that this is linked to the racist systems in this country. And these are advocates to fight for equality and birth justice. And you can find on their website amazing stories, birth stories, and a gallery of their storytellers. And check them out. Voices for Birth Justice. So it's voices and then the number 4, Birth Justice on Instagram. And now we will head back to our conversation with Melissa Morns. So you were talking about the different type, like kind of getting down the different types of aversion. And so the different types, like when you say different types, do you mean like the DMER, the dysphoric milk ejection reflex, the people who have suffered like sexual trauma, kind of having that as its own group because they share that experience, which is their negative experiences breastfeeding are directly related to that.
Yeah. And
then
yeah.
Go on.
And then so there's also people in the non-binary and trans community also experience chest feeding aversion, which we haven't looked at yet, but there could be things there to do with body dysphoria, or like that could be another whole other area to be researched. We haven't looked at all at people with sensory issues. That's another thing that could be considered. We are taking a look now at tandem breastfeeding while pregnant, and breastfeeding when your period returns. So that the hormone type of aversion, and also that tandem and pregnant aversion. And the thing that we're finding is that, and I'm sure there's probably more types out there that we haven't thought of or uncovered yet, but we are finding that they present differently. So the way that the person experiences these things is different. So like with women with a history, or people with a history of assault, and those that experience dysphoric milk ejection reflex, they'll have that experience straight away from the first time they breastfeed with every child.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, whereas tandem breastfeeding aversion comes on often after the people that experience it often after they've had a previously really good breastfeeding experience.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere. So, and there are other differences. There are other differences between the different types of aversion. And so, it's like to just piece out what's actually going on there and uncover the underlying causes will help us to be more specific about recommendations and support and what we tell health professionals. The recommendations will be different depending on the type of aversion. So, but I really think your stuff on boundaries, I think is important for anyone that breastfeeds, not just people that have aversion. That's just so key.
I think that's true. I mean, that was the biggest thing for me to be able to make it through was, and even if you're not experiencing, that's what you said, even if you're not experiencing this, just being able to have some control over, it really just gives you control, because everything feels so out of control, especially when you start feeling, aversions or whatever when you're breastfeeding. And then toddlers are just like, they don't care. They have no boundaries.
Yeah.
And so and I also think it's so great that like, that's another way of teaching them boundaries. It's like, you're getting boundaries out of it, but you're also teaching them, how to respect people's boundaries, which they don't get right away, but it's a foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that tandem breastfeeding thing, after they've had to deal with the milk supply going down through pregnancy, then when they get all that milk, it's like Christmas for them. It's like breast milk Christmas.
Right. Yeah. They're like, what do you mean? This is like, it's finally here. Of course I can have free and open access to it.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, so you were talking about how being able to isolate these types of aversion will help kind of figure out what's going on there and make recommendations. But so I know it's early, but do you have any leads? Like, is there any idea right now? What is happening? How is it happening? What is happening? What was happening to me? What was happening inside my body that like was so, how does that happen? There's such an extreme reaction and feeling to something. Do we have any idea of like what is going on? I mean, I know I hear about hormones.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. So, okay. So with DEMA, they think that is something to do with dopamine, although that needs more research.
Okay.
With people that have a history of abuse, then obviously it's the history of abuse that's triggering those
Sure.
dissociation and those feelings. With tandem and pregnant aversion, we're not sure, but there is a theory out there that it could possibly be, there could be an instinct kicking in there somewhere. And when you speak to people that have experienced that type of aversion, they describe it in that way. The people that I've interviewed, I've done in-depth interviews with a bunch of tandem people who experience that kind of aversion, and they talk about it as in this way that sounds primal. So we also need to investigate that further. So I am looking into that a bit more, the evolutionary psychology behind that, evolutionary biology aspect of that type of aversion. But we're still, like you just mentioned, we're still sort of at the beginning of that journey. And which other types have I left out?
I think you covered them all. I mean, you've covered all the ones that we talked about today.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting to me that these types have such different origins or causes, and yet the feeling is so similar. I know with DMAR, it's like that's different. It's from, and you were saying with the history of sexual assault, it's from, from the get-go. And so the onset is maybe different. But when we're explaining, this extreme feeling, it's very similar. Is it not?
It is, in that it's a negative feeling and sensation while you're breastfeeding. I just remembered the other type that I left out that we kind of know about, and that's when people get it around the time of ovulation and menstruation. We think that has something to do with prolactin is a hormone that just has an effect on your entire body, but it has an effect through the hypothalamus pituitary prolactin axis. So that's another thing that we also need to investigate. Sorry, what was the last thing that you said? And I was going to answer that as well.
The causes.
Right. If it feels similar, if the different types.
Right. The feelings of similar. Yeah.
So from what we can see from the way that people talk about it in the research that we're doing, is it feels kind of different. So depending on the type that you're getting. So people that experience DMAR, they talk about it in this very black cloud comes over your head and they feel depressed. They use the word homesick in the pit of your stomach, and then it passes, it lifts after the letdown reflex. Those who have a history of childhood sexual assault talk about triggered trauma memories. So they start having flashbacks, they have dissociation. And so, they have that experience. People with tandem use the word throw a lot. That word throw comes up over and over again.
I know. I don't mean to laugh. It's not funny, but I know what it feels like. That particular thing, I know exactly how that feels.
So, so I mean, they're similar in that it's a negative experience that you're having while you're attempting to breastfeed, but when you start to sort of piece it out, they feel different. The way that they present is different. The underlying cause is different, and so we probably need a nuanced approach to the way that we support these populations from a healthcare perspective.
Right. And I know specifically for this episode, or for, what I talk about, because we do have, we talk about the dysphoric milk ejection reflex. We talk about that kind of separately as its own, kind of as its own thing. Yeah. I've actually never really put that under the umbrella of nursing aversion. Just I think maybe because there's more written about it.
Yeah, which is why.
And it kind of has its own title.
Yeah, totally. They've got their own Wikipedia page. Like, go those guys.
That's when you know you made it. So I kind of take them out of that. I mean, my heart goes out to everyone experiencing that. But I mean, for this particular conversation, for me, my understanding of what most people associate when they're talking about nursing aversion is when it sets in on pregnancy and through the tandem nursing and maybe like around ovulation and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how I came to the research, and what my research proposal was just that. But then
Yeah.
when we went and had a look at me publishing that first meta-ethnography about what's out there right now, there was so little out there that my supervisors just said, look, we've got to kind of start at the beginning here. We need to just say that people that are breastfeeding are having negative sensations when they're breastfeeding, and they want to breastfeed. They're able to breastfeed. So, the latch and the supply, all that stuff's working, but they're having these negative sensations and feelings that are coming up. And my heart is really in researching, going down that tandem and pregnant and hormone, going down that pathway of that aversion that I experienced personally. And that's what brought me to it. But just for the point of getting the word out there in the literature, we're having to kind of cast it a bit wide. So we've published the meta-ethnography. I've done interviews. I've done a bunch of in-depth interviews, and I'm writing up articles right now from those that just talk about the experience and how it feels and the effects that this experience has on the relationship between the parent and the infant, and the relationship between the person experiencing aversion and family members, and just themselves, their relationship with themselves, their idea of like parenting and breastfeeding. And it's kind of it's complex, and it does have a big effect on. It's not just about that relationship with the breastfeeding child. This also impacts on relationships with partners, and and then so we also have a survey that's live at the moment, and that survey information combined with the interviews will give us a mixed methods analysis that will help us to piece out those different types and write specifically to those different types of negative experiences that people have when they're breastfeeding. And going forward, I'm hoping to run a trial. We've found that from the main nursing aversion group that I wrote a little, because my undergrad degree is naturopathy. I'm a naturopath with a master's in public health nutrition. So years ago, I wrote a file in one of the groups just saying these are different things that you can take for nutrition that help people for their mental health and just general well-being, but specifically for mental health. And I thought, that can't hurt. That's only going to help. So I just put a couple of recommendations in that file that I knew were safe for people that were pregnant or breastfeeding. And we just found from the group anecdotally that a lot of people felt like magnesium seemed to really help them. It was just one of the things on the list of like 5 things. I still actually think people should try to take all of those things. But from the group, people really started saying that they noticed if they stopped taking the magnesium, that's the one that they could feel. And it's just kind of grown like a life of its own, the magnesium thing. Now I see it all over the place. People saying if you're having negative breastfeeding issues, try taking magnesium. So I'd really like to run a trial on that after I finish this. Hopefully I'll have this wrapped up by the end of this year, and then maybe run a trial on magnesium and let's find out, what type of magnesium and what's the dose and who's it helping, and see if we can move forward with that. I'd also like to further investigate that evolutionary psychology stuff, the evolutionary biology stuff, and look into that whole instinct thing, because it is there. Of course, there are hormones and neuroendocrine chemicals that happen underneath these experiences, and so these are things that we can measure. We can test those things. So, I got really nerdy then, didn't I? Did I trail off?
No, I'm eating it up. I love it. This is great. No, I want to hear more. I mean, so I'm thinking like you mentioned the survey. Can people we'll put the link to that. If you're experiencing nursing aversion,
Oh yeah, yeah.
join the
Yeah,
study
thank you. To get
because that will help.
to get ethics approval, it's a bit tricky to run a survey. It was considered like a higher risk, ethically a higher risk survey, because people are talking about stuff that's quite, that can be a bit emotional. And so on every page of
Mm-hmm.
the survey at the bottom, we have numbers that people can contact if they feel like it
Okay.
stirs stuff up for them. In Australia, we have the Australian Breastfeeding Association, who have a 24/7 hotline that you can call, that is manned by mums or parents, breastfeeding parents, and they're volunteers, and it's an amazing service, and
That is
it's so
incredible.
awesome. It's so awesome. They get government funding, as they should.
Can we get the international number for that so we can?
They're amazing.
We might need to be calling another country.
Yeah, they're so amazing. They're supporting the research, actually. They've shared it in Australia. They've shared the survey about, which I felt honoured that they were getting behind this research. That's awesome as well. So yeah, it's just for Aussies right now, but we are going.
Oh, it is. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, and people who are currently experiencing aversion, because we
Right.
have
Mm-hmm.
validated instruments in that survey that only work if it's for an experience you're having right now. They don't the tools in
Mm-hmm.
the survey don't work if you're thinking about it retrospectively. But
Mm-hmm.
once we get this is sort of preliminary stuff. Once we get this one out the way, it lays the groundwork then for us to do bigger international studies and include,
Right.
just include more people. So
Well, and the international community will certainly benefit from
yeah,
from the research itself.
yeah,
The findings and whatever you write up.
yeah. I tried really
But
hard to do the international study, actually, and my supervisors were like, "No, you need to just say, yeah,
one step at a time.
yeah."
Yeah. But the Facebook group is for everyone.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've got some
Yeah,
great
that's a
files.
great, fantastic group.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yes, and so
yeah.
we'll put the link. That link is in the show notes for that too, if you want to join that group. And so tell us about the files in there that people can access.
Yeah, so you've been linking to that group for a while, Abby. You did a couple of blog posts in like 2014
Yeah.
and linked to the group. And I think back then, we didn't have a huge amount of people in the group, and I think a lot of people found us through your blog. So yeah, that's awesome. And I mean, there is a lot more information, just general information out there now, for people. Like your blog post, I think, was really good. Like even back then, like you were saying, stay hydrated and look after you. Just those self care tips, I think, are really important as well. Your stuff on boundaries is really important. But yeah, the files in the group are just like that old nutrition file. And then there's tips and in the tandem breastfeeding group as well, I wrote one that is just called What I Wish I Knew When I Started Tandem Breastfeeding. And it just talks about like the toddler breastfeeding more than the newborn and setting boundaries. And there are some personal stories in the Aversion group, which I think can be really helpful, because a lot of people, when they first join the group, just feel so much guilt and shame and so alone. And then just to go and read some stories about how other people
Right.
navigated their way through it. And a lot of people end up having a happy ending. I think that's something that I really like to try to say to people, is that,
Yeah.
if you can find a way to just find an end to that breastfeeding relationship that you can live with, that isn't going to cause you too much guilt and shame going forward. That's so important. It's so important putting energy into that, just trying to find an end to it that's okay for you, and that you think is okay for your little one. Like it's just so important.
I think that's true, and that was one of the things that stood out, from that paper that we talked about, a few months ago, was that that was that people didn't regret it.
Yeah. Yeah.
People didn't regret it. They were happy that they made it that far and that they were able to find these ways to have that happy ending. And I know that's how it was for me too. I mean, I look back at that time as so difficult, but
Yeah.
I pushed through until I felt like, okay, well, actually, I pushed through until they just decided to stop. And so, but with, a lot of work around, especially the boundaries, which allowed me to get that far and allowed me to, to let them self wean, which is what I wanted.
Yeah.
And so a lot of work went into it in order to reach that goal. But then that was the thing that that I could live with.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted, you go and you think, well, I'm just gonna, they're just gonna nurse all the time. They're just gonna, it's fine. We'll just nurse all the time. And then you get to when you're experiencing nursing aversion, that's just not possible. You can't, it's just this, your body's just telling you no.
Yeah.
And so trying to, it's like trying to negotiate with your body. Like, okay, can you handle, twice a day? And at bedtime, you're going through this whole negotiation process of like, what can we handle in order to get to that place that everyone can live with.
Yeah. And then, yeah, that internal conflict is brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
My last one, my youngest, I breastfed him till he was done on his own. He was 4.5, and co-slept with him and just had this really like no drama breastfeeding relationship to just finish it off on. And it was so nice. It was so just joyous to have that as the last, just for me, as my last experience, just to have that and have him wean when he was ready. And that was really healing for me to have that at the end. And I think that's another, key difference between some of the different types of aversion is that, like, I didn't experience any at all with that last one. So, and a lot of tandem.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, a lot of tandem parents say that. Yeah.
They say that they'll have another one and experience no aversion at all.
Well, some people get it around their period. But I was really lucky. I didn't have that. So, yeah, I just really lucked out with that last one and was able to just have that really healing experience. That's something else that people with a history of childhood sexual assault say when they are able to continue, that just to see their body in that really positive way and that their body was used in this amazing way to nurture their baby, and it can be very healing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I actually have an admin at the Badass Breastfeeder who has a history of sexual assault, and she's written a lot of guest blog posts about that. And she does write about that. She writes about how, it was kind of just coming to terms with her body and how, through this relationship with her children, how she was able to kind of take ownership of her body again and feel empowered in that way. And what an incredible thing to go through,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would work that way. I don't have any experience with that, but she does share that, and we can, and since I'm mentioning it, put that in the show notes too.
Yeah. I think that's helpful
for everyone to check out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. I think this is all. I want to put all of this in the aversion group. I think it's all.
Yeah, totally.
Really helpful.
What have you heard else that people, because you're saying these, people talk a lot about magnesium. Is there anything else that people really say, like, this is really, because for me, it was like the more tired I was, the worse it was. But like, it's kind of like, when somebody tells you, well, make sure you're getting enough sleep, it's just like, I just feel like punching those people.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, like I'm choosing to not get enough sleep with my new baby.
Yeah. And a lot of people are
like you don't have control. Like I don't, people have very little control over that, especially, with kids. So what else do people say? Have people said anything else? Like, have you heard from talking to so many people, things that work for them?
Oh, yeah. A lot of people in the moment, like just to get through the actual sensation, talk about distracting themselves with whatever they can use.
Oh, yeah.
So, looking at their phone, watching the TV, talking to somebody. One of the participants that I interviewed actually said it really helped just having someone else in the room, just having a conversation with someone was
Mm.
distracting
Mhm.
enough. So, yeah, the distraction thing is pretty big. Distraction, boundaries, looking after yourself. Support
Mhm.
is really key. And however you find that, it's so fundamentally important. So, some people are lucky enough to have a partner that's really helpful, but that's not always the case. And quite
No.
a few of the people that I interviewed said that their partner didn't understand and, in a sense was sort of compounding the,
Exactly. They can totally make it worse.
yeah. So, but finding that support in any way that you can, even that peer to peer online support, just knowing that there's somebody else out there that's having a similar experience. Because a lot of people, there is a lot of self blame. I've had people come talk about in the interviews, talk about how they were angry. They would be in the moment angry at themselves for having that experience.
Mhm.
And um, like, I just want to say to everybody that's experienced this that it's not your fault. It's not your fault. We don't know exactly what causes it yet, but it's not your fault. And
And it's not just in your head.
yes, it's not in your head. This is a
It's just not
physical,
something that you're making up, but yeah, this is a real
yeah,
thing.
yeah, 100%.
Just because we don't know about it yet and we don't have all the language and the research around it yet doesn't mean that it's not real. It's just that energy and resources haven't been put into it.
Yeah.
And so we need to put it in there to give a name to it and all of that, but it's not in your head.
One of the parts,
And so much of this is told, we're always told that things are in our head or we're making it up, and that kind of stuff always pisses me off.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, because it's not right. Like, one of the participants told me, she was telling me all about how she was going through postnatal depression at the time and getting counseling when she got aversion. And the person that was counseling her said to her, "How do you know that this isn't just postnatal depression?" And she said,
Mhm.
"Because it's only when I'm breastfeeding my toddler and then it stops."
Yeah.
It's like, I
Yeah.
don't feel that all the time. It's specifically when I'm breastfeeding my toddler and then it stops. Whereas the depression was all day, every day. So, yeah.
Yeah, we know. We know the difference. We know what's going on with ourselves, and too what's going on with you. And, don't let people tell you that it's not real.
Yeah.
So this has been such a good conversation. Thank you so much. When so I've asked you questions, and we've kind of, I've asked you as many questions as my personal experience or whatever can go, but is there anything that I missed? Like, is there anything, from doing the research and from, talking to so many people, are you starting to hear things? Are you starting to learn things that maybe, are kind of new to the conversation? Or does that make
Yeah,
sense?
totally.
Did that question make any sense at
Yeah,
all?
no, totally. It totally made sense. I'm just trying to think. I knew you were going to ask me that, actually, because I have listened to your podcast
Did
before,
you?
and you do that. You
Oh,
do at the end.
I do.
You have this really great way of saying to people, "What would you just say if?" Yeah. Um, um, I think just,
Well, then it always makes me feel good when they stumble a little, because I'm like, oh, well, I
yeah,
really
you've
did
covered
ask
it.
everything.
Yeah, yeah, nailed it. um, yeah, yeah, no, really. Just what I was saying before, um, just that, if I could, like, just speak directly to people that are experiencing aversion right now, just to know that it's just not your fault and you can find a way out of it that is going to be okay. You can find a way out that'll be okay for you. It'll be okay for your little one. There are ways of navigating your way through it. And you feel like you're in this tunnel with no end, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. You just might not be able to see it right now. But just, hang in there, because, like all really difficult things, this too shall pass and you will get out the other side of it. And yeah, That's pretty much all I would say.
That's fantastic. And everything that we talked about and referenced in this episode, you can find in the show notes at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com. So I know we talked a lot about a lot of things, and it's like, well, what about the group and what about the survey? I'm in Australia. Just go to the show notes and you can find all of that right there, linked right there. You can find it all. We won't leave you hanging. Well, Melissa, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day.
It was so cool to
been
chat
really
with you,
enlightening.
Abby. I've been a fan forever, so.
Well, and please come back and let us know, as you're unfolding all this research and all the things that you find. We would love to be, on the cutting edge of that.
Yeah,
We'd love to be the first ones to know.
Yeah, breaking news.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you, Abby.